Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Genesis chapters 10 and 11 in our continuing survey through the Old Testament. We left off last time. We'd been looking at the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, and we saw the Abel and Seth narrative, and then how Cain kills Abel, and how the genealogy goes all the way down to Lamech. And then we notice it goes down through Seth now to Enoch, who is also the seventh in the genealogy. So Lamech is the seventh through Cain. Enoch is the seventh through Seth, and from Enoch it then goes to Noah. We looked at the story of the flood, and from Noah, it continues to go. The seed of the woman's line, the line of Christ, goes down to Shem. That's one of the three sons of Noah. But we also saw a problem with Ham. And it wasn't Ham that was cursed, but his son, and that was Canaan. And that was all covered in our last session. And now we're going to go from Shem to Abraham. But before we get to Abraham, some other things take place. We have Genesis chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. That's where we closed last time. We saw that prophecy that Noah gives about the nations, about Canaan. He mentions all three of his sons in that. And there is the curse that's placed on Canaan. Now we're going to come to Genesis chapter 10, where we see a listing of the nations. Now, it's not saying it's listing every nation that ever existed, but it's looking at a representative sampling. There'll be specifically 70 nations mentioned. And then the number 70, I think, is maybe significant. It's representative of something. And we'll also see, now we're not going to spend any time on it, but in chapter 10, you also see mentioned the career of one particular person, someone named Nimrod, one of the descendants of Canaan. I'm sorry, not of Canaan, of Cush, and he'll be the founder of a number of cities in Mesopotamia, like Babel, or now we haven't talked about this yet, but Babel and Babylon are the same place. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. And then Genesis chapter 11 tells you how that takes place. It's the division of the nations. That's where we see the Tower of Babel story, or if you want to call it the Tower of Babylon, that's okay too. It's the same place. So that's going to be the division of the nations and the judgment of the languages, where the languages are separated at Babel. Now, I probably ought to mention the lifespan issue that we see, and this is just adding up the dates and the ages that are given in the genealogy, specifically in the one in Genesis chapter 5 and also in chapter 11, where it gives the ages at which each one of these people in that line, how old they were when they had their firstborn son, how old they were when they died, and we can and this is just looking at the deaths. Notice from Adam to Noah, most of the people that are listed here lived at least 900 years. That's a very long time. And then there is a precipitous drop after Noah. Notice it goes down to 600, and then it goes down lower to the 400s, and it slows up a bit, but it's still going down until we get to Terah and Abraham in those later years. So something happens in the days of Noah that causes this drop. Now, I don't know. I used to have some theories. Finally, I decided all my theories are probably wrong, and I took them and put them aside, and I'm just going to say I don't know what causes this. But it's a significant observation, so we ought to point that out. As we look at a map, and in Genesis chapter 10, we said we have that table of nations. Not going to go through all of that. That would be a much more detailed study. But we have the three sons of Noah, and the son Japheth corresponds roughly to what we call the Indo-European peoples. That is, and notice I've got both Europe, but the Indo part refers to India. So I put it on the title all the way across the map, and it would have to stretch much further than this map goes. And then the second son, not necessarily in this order that I want to mention, is Ham. And remember, Canaan is one of the sons of Ham, but he's not the only one. Also, there's one called Mitzrayim, which is the old name for Egypt, and Put and Cush. Now, Cush later on is going to be south of Ham, down in Africa. But at this point, at least Nimrod is described in Mesopotamia and founding cities in Mesopotamia. So maybe Cush got around a bit, and not just confined to where I have the name. And then the third son is, of course, Shem, and that gives rise to the Semitic peoples, both Jewish people, but also other Semitic peoples like the Assyrians, like the Aramaeans, and so on. So these three people groups, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, give rise to the Indo-European, the Semitic, and the Hamitic. These days, philologists talk about many more languages, but they still talk about the Indo-European family of languages. They still talk about the Semitic family of languages, and depending on who you talk to, they still refer to the Hamitic family of languages. Now, are there other families that don't fit easily into these three? Maybe they are. I'm not a philologist. I'm okay with Greek and Hebrew, but there's a lot of languages I haven't studied, so I don't want to speak authoritatively. But those that I've read talk about these three family groups, and maybe some others which might be offsprings of these or might be something unrelated. I couldn't say for sure, so I don't want to misrepresent the scriptures when it comes to this. Genesis chapter 10 and verse 25 give one interesting aspect to this whole story, where we read two sons were born to Eber. Now, Eber, or Eber, seems to be the source of the term Hebrew, where this is where we get that word Hebrew. And notice this is before Abraham was born. So this actually goes back earlier than Abraham to this designation of one group, one people group known as Eber or Eber, the source of the term Hebrew. And then we find out these sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided, and his brother's name was Joktan. We're not going to spend any time on Joktan, but I want to look at this name Peleg. Interesting name, because in his days the earth was divided, and his name actually points to that. So this idea of the earth being divided, well, what does that mean? We're not told. We could probably understand that a few different ways. Again, I've had some theories in the past. I think what we're supposed to understand is that this is going to explain what happens in Genesis chapter 11 with the division of languages. So what we have here is this term Peleg, that's his name, and he is called that, for in his days the earth was, there's the Hebrew for it, Peleg, that's all that Hebrew means. In his days the earth was Peleg, it was divided. His name means that, and he's named that because the division of the earth takes place. Now, what division is that? I think we're talking about the division of languages. Over in Psalm chapter 55, verse 9. Now, it's not speaking about this event, but it's using the same word, confuse, O Lord, divide their tongues. And when he says divide their tongues, it's peleg their tongues. It's the same word. And notice how tongues can be peleged, languages can be peleged. For I have seen violence and strife in the city, and the psalm goes on from there. Now, it's not talking about the division that took place back then. It's asking, Lord, do it in a different way, in a judgmental way. Well, when I look to Genesis chapter 11, that's going to be judgmental too. But I don't want to pretend that that's the same event, just the same word that is used. Verse 32, these are the families of the sons of Noah, according to their genealogies, by their nations, and out of these the nations were separated on the earth after the flood. Now, that's not the same word there. That's a different word for separated. But notice out of these families, you have the nations come forth. Now, if we do not count the three sons of Noah, then there are in this table in Genesis chapter 10 a total of 70 names. And I think that might be significant. Why? Because when we get to Genesis chapter 46, verse 27, we're going to read that all the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70 people. So it's the same name, 70 nations, and then 70 people in Jacob's house, in Jacob's family, that go down to Egypt. I don't think that's just by chance. Is it just stylized? Maybe it's a bit more than that. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, beginning in verse 7, Moses says, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, speaking about what happened in Genesis chapter 10, when the Most High gave their nations their inheritance, he separated the sons of man. He set the boundaries of the people according to the number of the sons of Israel. Did you catch that? Not only did we notice that there's 70 names in Genesis 10, and 70 people went with Jacob down into Egypt. But according to this passage, that the number of the nations, the boundaries of the peoples of the nations, were set according to the numbers of the sons of Israel, how many there would be going down into Egypt. Verse 9, he explains why this is. For the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. So what we're seeing here is that Israel is represented as being a microcosm of the entire world. I have 70 people in Israel going down in Egypt, and I have in Genesis chapter 10, 70 nations. Now, I'm not saying there's not other nations, but 70 representative nations that are described there in Genesis chapter 10. And of course, Jesus is the better Israel who came to save the world. So that really works for us. He came to his own, but he also came for the world. He came first to the nation of Israel, to the Jews first, as he would say, but then to all the world. Genesis chapter 11, and here we're going to find out how it happened. Genesis 10 tells us what happened, the dividing of the nations. Genesis 11, beginning in verse 1, tells us how it took place. Now, the whole earth used the same language and the same words. I take this literally, that there was one language. Verse 2, it came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Now, the land of Shinar is what Genesis is going to describe as Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers. There's another way of describing it. You could also call it Aram Naharim. Genesis will use that term too. To speak of, and literally that means Aram between the rivers, just like Mesopotamia means land between the rivers. But Shinar is another term that describes this area. And we're going to see a city there. Notice I put on the map Babel. That's also Babylon. It's going to be the same place. In the Hebrew text, there's no distinction when you read of Babylon and when you read of Babel. In Hebrew, they are written exactly the same. For some unknown reason, our English translators rendered it Babylon everywhere else in the Old Testament, but here in Genesis chapter 11, they rendered it Babel. But it's the same place, spelled the same way. We pick up in verse 3, they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. Now, if they had been in Egypt, they could quarry stone. That's easy to find in Egypt. There's plenty of places where there's granite stone, and it's been used to build quite a number of the pyramids. All the pyramids that lasted are built of granite. There were some others that they built of mud brick, and they've long since crumbled and fallen apart. But notice, they didn't have that in Mesopotamia. And so instead of brick, they used instead of stone, they used brick. They made their own stones via brick. And then for mortar, since they ran short of that, they used tar for that. Verse 4, they said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top," and my translation says, "whose top will reach into heaven." Do you notice how the words "will reach" are italicized? That's the translators trying to help us. They meant well. I'm not sure this was particularly helpful because I'm not sure that the top was actually supposed to reach all the way up to heaven. It certainly would go up into the sky, and that would work into Hashemayim, the heavens. But I think maybe instead that the top was going to be oriented toward the heaven for religious purposes. And I'll explain what I mean in just a moment. Let's finish reading this. Let us make for ourselves a name that will be significant. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. God had said, "Go scatter, fill the earth." They said, "We don't want to do that. And to prevent us from having that done to us, let's build a communal place that will gather us together, a gathering point, a city and a tower whose top is oriented to the heavens, a tower that is set apart for the worship, not of God, but of the heavens and things in the heavens, but not God." This actually seems to be counter-theistic in the sense of not glorifying the God who created heavens and earth. Now, if you go to Mesopotamia, what you have is a whole series. Some are still standing. Most of them have crumbled into quite a bit less than what you're seeing here. This is known as a ziggurat, a temple tower. It is not a pyramid. Pyramids are for burial. Pyramids are big burial mounds, big burial objects. A ziggurat is there for worship. It could have one, or in some cases, more than one staircase leading up to the top. We have found them all over Mesopotamia. Actually, we found them in quite a number of places in the world. And that's not to say that they all came from the same location. I don't think that's the case. But in Mesopotamia in particular, we see this design. Let me show you a picture that a friend of mine sent me from, I think he was in Iraq when he took the picture. Here we go. This is actually the temple tower, the ziggurat at Ur of the Chaldees. They have, as much as possible, sort of put it back together. It was crumbling, still crumbling on top. I don't know that he took the picture, but somehow he picked it up and sent a copy to me back when he was in Iraq at the time. Well, let's go back to verse 9. What God has done, he shows up and he says, let's confuse the languages. Let's not allow them to continue this. And he comes down and he confuses the languages. And therefore, its name was called Babel. And the term Babel, that's just, notice when I see this term elsewhere in the Old Testament, Babel, sometimes the translators will call it Babylon, but it's the same place. It's called Babel because there the Lord confused, and this isn't the same word. It's actually a different word, but it sounds like because he confused, because he baleled the language. So it's called Babel because he baleled the language. It's a pun of the whole earth. And from there, the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. Now, this isn't how we got every single language that we have today. For example, English did not come about in Genesis chapter 11. What has happened is that languages have continued to separate and have continued to be formed and split up, but there are language families that are harder to explain, like we just talked about the Indo-European family of languages. And both English and Greek and German and French and Italian and Latin and a number of others, I'm sure, come from that family of languages. Now, those families have slowly developed, those languages in that family, but it might be that the family itself was created in this confusion at this time, so that I have, for example, I've got the Indo-European, the languages of Japheth, if I can call it that. I have the Semitic languages that, again, developed over time, but how did that family get started? Maybe it got started right here. And the much more diverse group seems to be the Hamitic group. It's so diverse that people have problems trying to figure exactly how to describe that. And was that group done here too, or were a whole multitude done at that time? I can't say because I'm not sure. But at least some continued to develop after that. So maybe it was these three families that were divided at this time. Now, in Genesis chapter 5, we saw a genealogy. It went from Adam all the way down to Noah, who had 3 sons, and there were 10 names in 10 generations in that genealogy. Now, again, as we come to Genesis chapter 11, following the Tower of Babel narrative, we have here in Genesis 11 Noah going down 10 generations again to Terah, who has 3 sons. I want you to see the pattern here, that there's a stylized pattern. And you say, well, is it just stylized, or are these exactly how many people there were, where I can count up the begats, or does it skip any generations? If I look at Luke chapter 3, I actually see an additional name in the Genesis 11 genealogy that is omitted here to make it 10 generations, but added in Luke. And I think that might be indicative, especially when I compare that to the genealogy in Matthew, which intentionally leaves out some names in order to have a certain stylization, a certain number. In Matthew, it's 3 sets of 14. Here it's 2 sets of 10, but in Matthew I've got 14 generations and then 14 and then 14, and it actually leaves out some names to make it fit. That might be happening here, and if that's the case, then asking the question of when did these events take place, events like the flood, and when did creation take place, we might not have the answer just by counting the genealogies. It might be more than that. Now, I'm not trying to put millions of years or billions of years, but I'm saying it might be quite a bit older than just counting the names that are in these genealogies. Finally, I want you to notice that with the Tower of Babel, you see judgment upon man's rebellion, and the languages are used to scatter mankind. And next, we're going to come to Abraham, where one man is chosen by God, and he's given a promise that he's going to become a great nation, so that as a result, all the nations are going to be blessed through him. And let me just say, we'll see the Tower of Babel, we'll see Abraham, but I also want to look at Jesus, where one man is judged for all of man's rebellion. And if you continue reading after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and after his ascension, you come to Acts chapter 2, where the gift of languages are used, the gift of what we call tongues in Acts chapter 2, to proclaim the new message, the good news that is given to us of the gospel. In the case of Babel, remember how they had said, "Let us make for ourselves a name for ourselves. We want to be people of renown. We don't want to be forgotten. Let's make a name for ourselves." To Abraham, God says, "I will make your name great." Actually, the word for name, remember, is Shem, just like Shem, Ham, and Japheth. I will make your Shem great. Babel had said, "Let us make a Shem for ourselves." Abraham had said to him, "I will make your Shem great." And to Jesus, we find that he has a name that is above all names, that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow and every tongue will confess. Tongue? That's what we're talking about here. How tongues came to be, how they came in judgment, but they also came after the days of Jesus, they came as a blessing. Every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord.